Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're all in. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. This is Chad McDaniel with Execs in the Know. And as we're preparing for today's webinar, I was excited to bring this topic again to our audience and community, as we've been talking for a number of years now about how we've been busting silos and delivering outcomes with leading brands, the data, along with operational technology silos. But a lot more meaning to that topic. And I brought a team of experts here to join us today. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have this collective group of mindshare that's really going to help us break down different elements of the conversation. I'm really going to encourage a lot of Q&A. I know there's going to be some questions, but we'll do that at the end because we have a number of things that we're looking forward to in the conversation. I've got a couple slides I want to go through if we could just next, and then we're going to jump right into the conversation. We're real excited for those that were in Clearwater, Florida with us this past March. And we had a great gathering for our live event, and we're looking forward to being in person again in San Diego, Coronado, October. So stay tuned. There's a number of great announcements. In fact, I think Nuance, you're going to be joining us at the summit, and we have a number of great guests and people coming out. So please do mark your calendars for October 24th through the 26th. If we go on to the next slide there, if this is your first time joining an Execs in the Know webinar, thank you and welcome. We appreciate your listenership and your time. I know how valued everyone's time is, but we're really a corporate CX sharing community, helping elevate the industry of us as CX practitioners. Also, enhancing the future leadership in our space. If you go to our execsintheknow.com website, there's a bunch of information available for you. Just go to the Knowledge Center, the Research Center. We put a lot of publication insights and data reports in our space. If we go on the next slide, our advisory board, I always like to give a quick shout out. Again, I really appreciate each and every one on this board. They do such a tremendous job of helping us in this industry and really trying to advance the conversation and the topics that we bring, such as today. On the next slide, I'll just say quickly, if you are not part of our corporate online marketplace, it's a great opportunity for you to come join us. It's 24/7. You can connect with many, many other brands, and the conversations are just tremendously rich and insightful. So send me a note, chat@execsintheknow.com, and I'll be happy to get you a link to how to join. All right. I wanted to make that short and sweet, John, because they're not here to hear about me from Execs in the Know. They want to hear about the conversation that we're about ready to have. John, you did an amazing job. I know how busy every executive is that is on this call today. You've done an amazing job of bringing some of the best mind shares. I don't know how you corralled these gentlemen, but I want to give you kudos and effort. And thank you for coming to our community at Execs in the Know and help us out in the topic.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chad, and welcome everyone on behalf of Nuance to our session today on busting silos and delivering outcomes. My name is John Dion. I'm a director within Nuance's Enterprise Professional Services organization, and I'll be acting as the moderator today. But as Chad alluded to, I'm joined by three of my esteemed colleagues. We have a really great panel of experts here, and as you're going to see, they bring a truly global perspective to this discussion. So I'd like to introduce you to Nick Buckle, who joins us from Brisbane, Australia, Fergus Keegan, who joins us from Dublin, Ireland, and Marco Petroni, who's joining us from Montreal, Canada. And before we go any further, I just want to take an additional moment, ask the gentlemen to introduce themselves a little bit further, and we're going to start with Nick.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks, John. So I'm Nick Buckle. I run the enterprise services team for the APAC Japan region. That team's primarily involved in delivering solutions around our customer engagement technology, and everywhere from India through Southeast Asia, Japan, and Australia. So we get to work with a lot of different customers and a lot of different cultures, and experience the CX issues, trying to bring those solutions to the different markets and different demographics. I've come from a technology background. I've always been in technology, but the last 25 years has been very focused around essentially customer engagement and automation around those technologies, and that's obviously been very centered on contact centers. And in the last years, as we've sort of gone in the world of omni-channel, and AI has helped us do that across all the channels, and that's, I guess, where silos have been quite interesting as we've started to try to exploit that. And I've worked startups through to medium and big companies, and I guess now we're part of Microsoft huge companies, and silos have been everywhere for good and bad. So yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick. And next we'll turn it over to Fergus.
Yeah, hi guys. Thanks, John. It's really nice to be here this evening. Yes, my name is Fergus Keegan. I look after the professional services delivery for the EMEA region for Nuance. So again, from a personal point of view, I've been involved in professional service delivery all my career, an engineering background, and worked in ERP services delivery for 10, 15 years before spending the last 20 years in the customer contact space. Again, I'm focused on customer contact, AI-driven solutions, or particularly around the digital channel in the EMEA region. So dealing with all sorts of customers, from some quite small boutique customers right up to large well-known brands and enterprises that everybody would be familiar with. I spent a good bit of time working globally as well. I've spent some time down with Nick down in the APAC region, and indeed I spent a lot of time working with the rest of the guys here on the call and some of our global deliveries as well. So it's really nice to be here this evening, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and some Q&A at the end.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fergus. And our third panelist, our third expert, Marco.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marco Petroni, Vice President of Professional Services, working out of Montreal, Canada. Peer to Nick and Fergus here on the call, and one of the 4 practice leads that's responsible for delivery in the Americas. Personally, I've been also, very similar background to Nick and Fergus. Been in technology all my life. Started my career in technology development, and then shifted more towards customer-facing applications, and have been there for the past 23 years. At Nuance, I've been here for 23 years, and given the sort of growth and expansion of the company, it felt like we've worked for 5 different companies over that span. From a responsibility standpoint, responsible for delivery in Canada, in the US, and also responsible for delivery in Latin America. So much like Nick and Fergus, a wide variety of different customer types, from really small, local, let's say, establishments to larger multinationals that work around the globe, and that I have the opportunity and privilege of collaborating with Nick and Fergus on. So looking forward to talking more about this today, and thanks for your time and attention.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. And as you can see, everyone, a really experienced panel. Really happy to be working on this with them today. And I do need to call out special thanks to Nick, who's joining us very early on his Friday morning. And on the other end of that, Fergus, into your evening. So thank you very much, guys, for joining today and collaborating on this. So with that, let's jump in. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So I want to start by acknowledging that, when we go through today's discussion, when we talk about busting silos and delivering outcomes, ultimately it's really about busting those silos to deliver a great customer experience outcome. And, when we work with our customers, almost all of them, say to us that providing that excellent, connected, kind of omni-channel customer experience is really paramount to them. It's critical that they do that. At least, they're aspiring to do that. And why not, right? I mean, if you offer that to your customers, if you make it easier for them to get the solution they need as quickly as possible, get the answer they need, or access to services as soon as possible, you're going to get a lot of benefit for that. If you think in terms of higher rates of customer satisfaction, that could lead to reduced churn, increased lifetime value, right? If you think about it from a contact center point of view, you're going to see a lot of operational savings, whether it be through higher rates of first contact resolution, more automation, more accurate routing, right? the benefits are great. But if you flip that a bit and you look at the costs, right, and there's a lot of data out there. You can go on the internet and find all kinds of things. This happens to be a study that I found from Accenture, the Accenture Strategy Group, and it's kind of speaking to the costs of providing poor customer experiences. And in the United States alone, they've tabbed that cost to be $1.6 trillion per year. The same study was saying that more than half of customers will leave you and move to another provider if they've received poor customer experiences, right? So when you think about these things, when you think about the benefits that you can get of providing that connected omni-channel experience, and you think about the costs if you don't, it kind of leads you to the question of why aren't more organizations there yet, right? And if we can go to the next slide, please. And I think, that gets us to the crux of today's topic. It's really about silos, and they're the culprit. I think many of us know this. Here's a stat here from the Harvard Business Review that's kind of outlining that 70% of people who work in the customer experience field and executives in that field, they really see the silos, that silo mentality as the biggest obstacles, the biggest barriers to providing that type of customer experience. So now look, before we jump into this now with some examples from some topic areas and examples from our panel, we want to just take a quick moment and poll you to see what you perceive are the biggest silo within your organization. So if you could just take a moment, select one of these options, and we'll see the results and share those in just a moment. I'm just going to give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay, well, looking at the results, the one that stood out the most was all of the above. Data, channels, organizational, and technology. I think that the good news is, as we think about those things, we're going to touch on all of those items as we move forward in the presentation. So why don't we jump in on that now? I think it's time to get our panel involved, and we're going to begin with what I'll say is a rather big and kind of burly topic, and that's the topic of data silos. I'm going to bring Fergus into the conversation first to talk about how an organization that he worked with used the COVID pandemic and then the acceleration of digital transformation that accompanied it as a way to kind of break down silos that existed, in particular between a voice channel and digital channels, and the experiences that they were seeing for their customers within those channels. So really trying to understand the data a bit more within those to try and bring those together, offer a better customer experience, and reduce some of their operational costs. So Fergus, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, cheers, John. Thank you. Yeah, so listen, I think it's quite a good place to start a conversation when we think about we're all kind of coming off the back of the pandemic, and still not too far away in a lot of places. But it's really when you think about breaking down silos, there was no choice but to break down the silos, and actually the pandemic itself was the one that created that demand for that. So really, as a lot of organizations saw during the pandemic, when people were overnight working from home, they had real difficulty getting their agents to staff telephony lines. So this one particular organization was facing the challenge of to get people to staff the chat lines and the digital lines. people were, that was much easier for them to staff and then to serve the customers. So they really had to really quickly get to a working model where customer service could be in domain driven from the chat agents. But the organization itself, the majority of their traffic was coming through on the telephony line. So really, what they needed to do was somehow smartly get that traffic to be satisfied by the chat agents. So and I mean, we've all kind of had these kind of generic deflection mechanisms to get people from IVR to chat, but that just wasn't going to be successful here because it just doesn't get the customer sat that's required. So what they wanted to do was having progressed with the caller and focus on the caller experience, get that caller experience through the IVR channel, learn about the intent, learn about the customer, understand the data, the telephony data for that customer, and then make a decision in real time on the call. What's the best thing to do with that customer? And what they wanted to do was examine the digital cues in real time, so they could make that decision. So that meant breaking down the silos between the digital team and the telephony team in order to get that data, so a more holistic view could be taken, and a customer-focused view could be taken to give that customer the best experience. And the important thing here was you're prioritizing the customer experience over the telephony department's experience, or indeed the chat department's experience, because some of these metrics were going to lose out, but the focus was on the customer. And so what we did was we got the players from both teams, because we were completely separate groups, basically forced them in a room over a kind of 2-week period and solution this on the fly. And then in an agile fashion, then we built an API layer into the IVR experience that interrogated the digital layer in real time, and then depending on queue status on the digital side, made a decision to insert that caller into the right place on the chat queue. So that really used the pandemic as an enabler, forcer to break down those silos. But what that organization then was able to do was kind of learn from that and see that kind of imperative was really key to drive some agitation in the organization and to get a good customer focused outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's a couple things there, right? I mean, if you think about, of course, it was about the data and understanding what was happening in one channel and the other and when to make the decision. But there are other things inherent to that as well, including sort of like the governance or the willingness to work together and bringing people together, to do it. And then using that, sounds like, as a catalyst to almost quick start or jumpstart other opportunities. So it's a really great example, Fergus. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right, John. I mean, they've used that now as an operating model then to build further customer experience improvements, focusing on that customer experience rather than the silo. I think that's the key thing that they took away from that. Create the imperative without the pandemic.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. And look, there's another area of data that we wanted to jump into today, and it's kind of a different lens that we're going to take. This is more related to goals and business objectives, and then specifically, what data are you using in the form of KPIs and metrics to judge that customer experience, to judge the operational success of your contact center? And specifically, I think it's really important to consider the degree to which that data, those goals, and then the KPIs and metrics that you have against those goals are aligned or misaligned across your channels. And this speaks a little bit maybe to what Fergus was getting at around the customer experience and the focus there. Because if there's misalignment, then individual channels are really going to only be incented to focus on achieving their goals. They're not going to be incented to consider what's going to happen in another channel or what the broader customer experience impacts are. And Nick has kind of some experience. We're going to bring Nick in here now to share that with an organization he worked with, where there was this misalignment, and then what they did to kind of address that to avoid, some potentially really negative outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I think the examples where you're reaching out and you need a bit of data to enable a specific customer experience, to get something done, to put that transaction into an automated channel, that's where we sort of go to initially when we're sitting down and brainstorm with customers about how to deliver that experience. It's natural to focus on the CX part. This example is exactly, it's more about what's the supporting sort of business framework we're putting in place to not only help get that project up and successful, but maintain it over its life. And so this case was a really big brand bank and one of our premium customers, honestly. And in the end, just to jump to the end of the story, it's ended up really successful. But when we started talking about this topic, we're going back over the history, and there were times when this solution was on the edge. And the reason it was on the edge was because we just didn't have sort of the cross-organization data to really support, justifying the efficacy of it. So it was a virtual assistant application, and like a lot of those, they're spawned out of the digital team. It was to be added to enhance all the existing digital channels, the web, and then expanding out to mobile app and to social channels. But initially started with a focus on the web channel, and so we got engaged with this team. And I really have to say that this company set themselves up. They'd really invested. They had a bunch of tribes. They were a very agile company working around the VA. So when we got engaged, I mean, it looked really encouraging and promising about how they were attacking the problem. And it was heads down and very focused on building out and delivering what that VA was targeted to do. We had a strong evangelist on their side, a real champion who was driving within the teams that we were working with to get the job done. And we launched, and as what happens with these virtual assistants, we launched them. And there's a sort of intensive training exercise where we start to get in more data and we can optimize them. And that was all going well. And essentially, we got it to a stable state. It was meeting all of the goals, and it was operating in sort of best practice levels as far as we were concerned. So there was a huge amount of optimism and across all the teams, this belief that it was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, and then looking forward to the opportunities of integrating more service functions into it. What sort of came as a bit of a surprise for us all was at a first sort of major cross-company review where all the different stakeholders were in the room. We were putting up dashboards showing this VA was very successful, and the contact center people who in the end were really the people who were supposed to benefit from it just didn't buy it. They had a perception that the introduction of this VA and the digital channel had increased traffic to the contact center, which was the exact opposite of what it was supposed to do. And so, this is a major surprise. And at that point, we started looking around, trying to take our data and show them the results. And it was clear we could definitely point to the performance aspects coming out of the data that we could touch and see. But the problem was we didn't have this linkage end to end. So we couldn't explicitly show that the interactions we were having were causing or taking away increased traffic into the contact center. And retrospectively, there was a sort of rush job then to try and find this data. And the people who owned the data that allowed us to put that picture together. So there was data on the web, there was data in the app, there was data in the back-end systems, there was data in the contact center. And they hadn't been engaged in the process end to end, certainly not in terms of the core of the delivery of the project. And so now people were knocking on their door, asking them for their data so we could prove or disprove the hypothesis that this virtual assistant was actually helping. Obviously, there's lots of things that can drive calls to a contact center. So correlating the introduction of the virtual assistant with other things that might be going on in their business and into the contact center was really important. And in the early days, a lot of these transactions that were not authenticated, so you couldn't explicitly say that this person logged on over here, did an interaction, and then they called the contact center 10 minutes later and correlate those. So it was actually a sort of complex technical job, even with the data, to prove that and build the correlation and the models and build that belief. And the contact center, I mean, you can't blame them because it wasn't in their goals. Yeah, the fact that somebody else was doing this initiative over there to do something on digital that they hadn't really been deeply engaged in. They were aware, obviously, but they weren't engaged, and they're busy, as most contact centers we deal with are super busy. And so when the digital team and us were knocking on the door saying, can you please help us and get involved here and give your resources and give your data, I mean, obviously that's not something they had in their plan. So at that point it was tricky, and getting them to get engaged and pull the data from all these disparate parts of the organization was not easy. And honestly, it was only through our chief cheerleader on their side and a lot of effort and going up through the organization, really trying to paint the picture of the opportunity and get this curiosity in the organization to really get into and understand the data before someone made essentially, what could have been a quite arbitrary decision to say it's having a negative impact, switch it off. And some of those knee-jerk reactions we've definitely seen over the years with customers where they just haven't had the engagement or the data across the silos to prove it out. And so I mean, in hindsight, you go back and from our side, this company looked like and are a really impressive company in terms of how they operate. We walk in there and it's agile. There's post-it notes and furniture with wheels on from one end of the building to the other. Everybody's collaborating, and I don't know if we just sort of took it for granted that out to the teams we were working with that way, and so the whole company would be that way, and all of the connections they needed across the company, and the data they needed across the company was there and being engaged. But in hindsight, if we went back, we'd ask more questions and we'd really get in to understand who we're serving and what's the real business outcome across all this and how are we going to prove that. And I think that's the question. We were focused on our channel, our performance, ticking all the boxes on that, which happened, but not having a wide enough perspective in supporting the customer to be asking those questions themselves and making sure they had that engagement. And the survey saying all of the above, when you go through these, I'm not surprised it's all of the above because the data and the organization and the tech, they sort of all go together. They sit in these organizations, and the lack of across company vision or mission or alignment across those is if you don't have that, then that's exactly what happens. So the people own the data and own the technology, and whenever you're trying to bring them together, it's the people you have to get through to get to the data. And so that was really our challenge. As I said, it's a good news story, and right now that VA it's handling over 500,000 conversations a month. 90% of those conversations are getting some business answer, and about 60% of them are fully self-serve. So it's really consequential, having a massive business impact, and the CX is fantastic, and they won lots of awards for this stuff. But the lack of that data, it could have easily ended up very differently. So in the end, it was a rearguard action. It's a bit like the pandemic example from Fergus. Something, you need a near-death experience before something happens to break the silos down sometime. And post that, they've reorganized and they've got the digital and the contact center, and they just refer to it all as digital now. They see contact center as digital, and that's all sitting under one owner in terms of the technology pieces at least, and the data comes with that. So since then, the opportunity to do a lot more and to expand the actual CX, but have that real end-to-end proof has really improved, and we've got a really great cadence of rolling out new services for the customer there.
That's great, Nick, and thank you for that. And I think that's a nice kind of entree into our next area, which is organizational. And although you were talking, I think, more about I'll call it maybe the governance that needs to be in place, and Fergus touched on that too, and organizational alignment in that sense. That's obviously very important. What we're going to talk about today in terms of organizational silos is really how to look at those maybe more from a geographic or more cultural lens, because we think this is critical as well, because so many businesses today, they operate across regions, whether they're in a large country, and there's different regional needs, or they're multinational or even truly global in nature. We know that different regions often reflect different cultures, different ways of thinking. And for organizations that might be looking to put something in that's more standardized, that degree of regional difference can represent silos that need to be overcome. And however, right, we also know that if we don't take into account those different ways of thinking from a regional or perhaps different country point of view, that we sacrifice potentially the highest rates of adoption. So I think ultimately we need to be thinking of both as we talk about this type of organizational silo. And to discuss this a bit further, I'm going to turn it over to Marco now, who's going to share his thoughts on an experience he's had with one of our telco customers, showing how they've kind of overcome these type of, say, geographic, cultural type of challenges. So Marco?
Yeah, thanks, John. And yeah, like you were mentioning, organizational silos do exist in those sort of regional or companies that are very regional and to some extent multinational as well. And I would say it tends to be, I would say, a hallmark of larger enterprises where you have these larger teams, and let's say a need to sort of, they're grown by silos to some extent, or they've come up through acquisitions. And it's not, although my example is going to be in the telco domain, it's not unique to telco. I'd say, in solutions that have, or in companies that have grown through acquisitions, or that have very sort of, not to overuse the term, but siloed teams, it's not unusual to find a mix of, customer care solutions, platforms, back-end systems that ultimately are all trying to attempt to accomplish the same goal and objective from a customer care perspective, but with that sort of local or regional lens, sort of applied to it. So starting with my example here, again, in the telco domain, this was one regional team that was looking to revamp their customer care experience by, starting with something relatively small, in the voice domain. And they started off by building a simple solution that was going to be proactively playing out information regarding outages when callers called into the customer service line. So the whole idea there initially was to leverage some back-end information so that if somebody was calling in and happened to be calling in to flag an outage and heard this message that was going to be played proactively, well, then they would hang up because they sort of heard the reason why they were calling about, and would deflect that call from being answered or handled by a customer service rep. This was initially an initiative that was driven by the customer IT team. However, based on the initial success of that sort of very straightforward application, it did get the attention of somebody at the business team, or in the business team, given again the impact that this had on deflecting calls. And so the next step there was to sort of build upon that success and build out functionality that would drive automation, and not automation for automation's sake, but an intelligent, proactive customer care experience where the direction and mantra that we were given was basically to say, look, don't ask the caller, don't ask the customer any questions that you already have the answer to, right? Either through previous interactions, back-end information. Don't ask that question. Don't offer options that aren't relevant to that caller. So be smart, be intelligent. And the hope was that people will interact more willingly with something that seems to be or to a solution that's more tailored to their to their specific situation. And so what we did is we worked that together with our IT and business partners and, built out that solution. And we started by, I guess, alluding, maybe tying it back to something that Nick and Fergus mentioned earlier, having I would say a data-driven approach. And at that time, the data that we used was primarily based on call volume, right? Looking to impact the larger volumes of calls that were coming in and prioritizing it based on that, as well as calls that, let's say, maybe didn't get as much volume, but that were costly to handle, either from a customer care or from an overall end-to-end experience. So we worked together to define the solutions, to define the metrics, and produce the reporting that allowed us to track and trend the main KPIs, as well as supporting KPIs for a more detailed, that would enable a more detailed and forensic view and deeper dive, should we or when we needed to get to that level of detail. And so after a number of months, we had delivered a very robust natural language understanding based solution that was providing automated customer care to a material percentage of calls. But, just given the nature of how we started, was only servicing, the calls or the callers for that specific market. And so on the heels of the business value and visibility from a reporting perspective that solution was driving, it did get the attention of IT and business leaders in this company, who then were looking at, wanting to roll out that solution nationally to get on one consolidated platform and solution. Doing so obviously was easier said than done because each market had their own specific platform. They had their own specific business rules. They had their own specific requirements, back ends. In other words, maybe another way of putting it, they had their own regional silos. And so the approach taken to sort of start breaking down those regional silos was to start to accommodate each market's requirements on the new platform, which along with reporting hadn't previously been available in most markets. So these were sort of legacy solutions that were sometimes, just implemented in the PBX, sometimes, even very rudimentary and didn't, were designed just to handle or route some calls without thinking about, the caller experience, or even reporting on how we were doing and or how they were doing and looking for opportunities to then, potentially enhance those over time. So, there, aside from being rudimentary, these were teams that were effectively blind to how those solutions were doing or not in terms of, helping that caller experience journey. And so, regional teams then that were looking at coming on board were not losing anything by coming on board to this solution that was getting rolled out nationwide, but we're getting a like for better solution that would maintain their regional requirements no matter what they were. It was all about flexibility, the other benefit is that they were going to be gaining reporting on how the solution was performing, and so as well they were achieving cost savings by decommissioning legacy hardware and redirecting teams that were previously, focused on updating these solutions, but that also had other jobs, and allowing them to focus on other development priorities that those regions had. And so, despite that sort of centralized solution, none of the markets were ever made to wait for sort of run the business type changes. And once they were on the platform, and they all had a seat at the table as part of the overall governance for that solution. So, in other words, once we started rolling that out, we had one centralized platform, one centralized governance, but one that was effectively managed by the individual, still siloed teams, but looking at this holistically and with everybody at the seat of with a seat at the table. And so, in some sense, this ended up being the Trojan horse that allowed everybody to come on board to one centralized solution, and that gave everybody visibility as to how these individual regions, markets were doing on this, consolidated, centralized platform. So, as we started taking a look at the metrics by market, we were able then to start taking a look at which markets, which regions performed better, and then start saying, okay, are there any specific reasons why we have to align to these specific business rules that are underperforming or these other ones, right? Or is there a reason why, maybe for, I don't know, specific state regulations, we need to maintain them. And so we were able to have very good, transparent conversations that ultimately ended up having a solution that took the best performing, let's say, configurations or business rules from each market and looked at operationalizing those nationally. And so it took time, but this was ultimately the key that was the key that enabled us to break down these regional silos. And I would summarize it to some extent as follows, right? Accommodate rather than dictate, and let the KPIs, let the data speak for themselves and drive the best way forward holistically. And this is true for regional silos as well as across lines of business, because then part of what was done was taking a look at this across the different lines of business for this company as well. And so a lot of these, let's say, best practices that were taken from this one line of business were then rolled out to these other lines of business in a similar manner to break down those silos as well.
Yeah. That's a great example of the, using something in a standardized way as the base, as you said, almost like the Trojan horse, and then allowing some customization, which is going to drive that adoption, but still hearkening back to all the best components and the parts that are needed from that standardized piece. So I think that's a great example.
Sean, we had one instance there which was quite similar to Marco in the retail space, but they really had a similar approach, but they had the added language consideration. So really, it kind of steps you into the technology a little bit. So they were able to adopt a similar approach to how Marco has outlined there, but then actually use their VA technology to basically localize it then into 8 further languages that they needed to roll out. One standard virtual assistant, but then being able to regionalize that from a language point of view, and then from a local market dynamic point of view as well. So that was another aspect that they were able to achieve there.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. So that kind of brings it more like where you're facing that multinational kind of or global sort of example. It's kind of reiterating the value of that approach. So that's
Sure.
That's okay. Well, I think that was great. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Fergus. I think we move on to our last area, and this is technology. And Nick, I know you've got some thoughts to share on this, and I'm going to bring in just a second, and particularly related to silos that exist as it relates to technology architecture and how things like the increasing move of contact center organizations to the cloud are really helping to break down these silos, particularly if when you're doing that, you kind of thinking about the architecture as it relates to a broader customer experience and what might enable that, technically speaking. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's just this big opportunity right now. As everybody knows, cloud's a thing, and particularly in the contact center, this migration. But just the technical core systems, so many people looking at these moves to cloud. And by definition, the cloud architectures, the microservice architectures, API approaches to getting service, it sort of pushes you in that direction. So I think naturally there are going to be benefits that come, but this is where organizations, I think, really need to try and capitalize, like get their architects and the designers really in this mindset of opening up and taking the opportunity that's coming. I think there's a lot of methodology that's going on, things like DevOps, but with that, maybe once in a lifetime opportunity as things are re-architected, really come at it from the idea of how can we develop and build these services so they're going to be available and out there and exposed and democratized. And we had a good example with a telco here with a real legacy system that we provided. It used to do directory assistance, which back in the day was an important thing and a big call traffic generator for the telcos. And now They just have to maintain them because of regulatory reasons. They don't want to. Old system, very proprietary, trying to solve a problem, sort of in-house in the speech recognition domain, essentially, which is recognize every person, every business in Australia, for example. And it was really complex to try and rebuild and solve for that. And we were going around in loops with the customer trying to find something that worked, because it was cost prohibitive. And it was only when people started to think about, people were very locked into the traditional CX that they'd had there and the perception of what sort of quality or accuracy it needed to provide, without a lot of data, honestly, to support that's what it was providing. And after sort of a couple of years going through the process, there was sort of this light bulb moment where people started to switch their thinking, and they just looked out to the cloud, and they looked out to the open APIs. And what was a very big monolithic proprietary solution, very focused and targeted, that probably only a few people in the world could actually manage and look after, ended up being solved by a web location API, and our sort of open language model, essentially taking what people were asking for, open text translation or dictation of that, and throwing it into a web-based location search that was designed for essentially looking up places on the browser. Now, when those people designed that API for looking up places, I don't think they were thinking we're going to solve a directory assistance problem on an IVR for some legacy telco app, but just the opportunity for it to be exposed. And then for the architects and our designers and the customers' designers to switch this thinking around, how can we possibly put this together differently? Honestly, it's the end solution turned into about 30% of the cost of the rebuild. And the performance, even though none of that was optimized or thought about to be delivered for a voice IVR speech interaction, actually exceeded how the old system was working. So it's opportunity, but it's also a mindset to, particularly architects and designers, as they get these new platforms, cloud, API, available to them, is to really be looking out there and really seeking out innovation and, as I said earlier, curiosity around how could we solve this differently with some of these architectures that become available. I think the other thing I'd say is something I'm excited about is this move to low-code and no-code platforms. In the past, the development of IT, the development of a new capability, it was purely in the hands of software coders, and obviously there's still a big part of that's needed, particularly at the transactional core system side of things. But we're starting to see in our own world and the tooling that we provide, but around the enterprise in general, these platforms coming out that are really opening up who can get involved in delivering solutions, who is now an application builder. It's a totally different world. All the hyperscalers are bringing these sort of capabilities, and it just starts to change the dynamic of who's in control of, particularly when you talk about CX. I think there's a lot of opportunity for now the business analysts who before were representing what the company or the marketing or the contact center needed, and representing that to the software development teams who would go and build stuff and put in infrastructure. Those business analysts are now getting involved in the actual creation of CX itself, the design and implementation. So those boundaries are starting to blur, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to be thinking about the skills and the type of people who are involved in that conversation now, and having the spectrum of service creators as opposed to IT and software developers and the business or the contact center. It's all starting to merge. I think that opens up this real opportunity in the middle for innovation, and we're seeing this in some of our customers who are adopting these low-code platforms right now. People who used to be business owners are now developing CX, and so the efficiencies of them being able to take straight from their business needs and their customer needs and implement is bypassing these steps or the silos of even involving us, of bringing in and helping design and build and test and roll out. These platforms are now enabling that. So I think that's really quite a transformational time for CX delivery in the contact center and across the channels as Omni becomes available. So it's really exciting, I think, right now. We're sort of at the verge of the whole dynamics of getting CX in the hands of the customers and the people who care most about the customers and are closest to it, really getting that at some sort of scale.
That's great. Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Fergus and Marco, for your observations and sharing these experiences that you've had. Before we move into our Q&A, I just want to give you each maybe a chance, maybe a quick word of wisdom or something you might want to leave the audience with. And Nick, maybe I'll start with you.
So I guess I'd say all these things, particularly on the technology side, and these platforms are opening up opportunity. Every time we look at one of these silo busters, it's primarily about the people. And I mean, silos exist for a reason. They break down problems. They allow us to put skills together. They allow you to scale. So busting maybe isn't the right word. We don't want to destroy them. It's about the connectivity. It's about preventing isolation of ideas and knowledge. And the things that really breaks that down for me is culture and having the company vision and the culture, the way people behave. You've got to reward and incent those sort of behaviors that bring people together, and not reward and incent the things that allow people to control their own domain and be very good at that, but no intersection. So that might be bottom-up culture by an evangelist. It might be top-down culture. I think if you really want to make a difference, a systemic, sustained difference, it's leadership in the company, building that culture that rewards that sort of behavior.
Great. Well, thank you, Nick. And Fergus, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, maybe just building there, John, what Nick is saying. I mean, go back to that pandemic and that pandemic example. The pandemic itself was an enabler, but you need enablers and you need custodians of that experience in your organization at a senior level with the teeth and the influence to bring the different groups and organizations together. Because if the culture is right, and then you have the leadership with the passion and the drive and a bit of the determination to make it happen, it can all come together. But you do need somebody from, whether it's a customer experience officer or somebody at a senior level with the ability to affect change through the organization. I think it's becoming a key role across our orgs.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Marco?
hey, I'm sorry, I'm back. Can you hear me?
No worries. Nothing
Yeah.
like some technology. And I know we didn't get to hear from Marco there, but I do want to jump into some questions on the case studies. And I'm really keeping our community in mind in some of the conversations that we have, if I may. So first of all, gentlemen, great job. Audience, we kind of went through the three pillars: data, organizational, technology. And if you have certain questions there, do put them in the chat box window and I'll make sure I try to address it. Marco, I want to start with you. You had brought in an example and I really liked the organizational silo, how you look at it from culture and also geographical. I was thinking last week, I believe it was, Rogers Telco had probably the largest outage in Canada in decades or whatever. How could they have used automation, or how were they communicating with the customers during that, or should have been communicating? I don't know if you have any knowledge or insight to that, but I was thinking of some of the things you were mentioning in your example there. Are you a Rogers customer?
Yeah, I am. Actually, my corporate phone is with Rogers. It's interesting because the family has it with another provider. So we were, I was acutely living the lack of communication, let's say, from a business perspective on my cell phone, but had no issues, let's say, or seeing my family have no issues on with their other provider. Yeah, I would say, Chad, part of it was, I think that was frustrating for a lot of the Rogers customer base was ultimately the lack of communication. And I think one of the things that, look, we've all been in this industry for a long time, and I think the at times when events or outages happen, and they don't happen all that often, but it's an unfortunate sort of eventuality that happens every little while. I would say, the important thing is always communicate. You got to lavish that communication out to the caller population as best you can. And I think the thing that was frustrating for that caller population was effectively nobody heard anything for a while, and I think that was a little bit tough in terms of being able to set expectations around when can I expect service back? Should I be looking for alternate means in order to make up for what I expect to be maybe potentially a prolonged outage or not, right?
So in the case of emergency measures such as that example, or even in your example, Marco, you talked about that case study, deflecting calls and driving automation and data-driven approach. For our audience, how does Nuance help organizations in that realm? Can you give me some examples? And again, I know this is not meant to be a commercial, but I really want to understand, how does Nuance work with organizations to assist in these type of discussions we've been having?
I mean, ultimately, what we try and do is, understand the business or customer service problem that a given company or organization is attempting to solve, right? And then based on that, what solutions, what reporting can we bring to bear to solve the problem, but also track how we're doing, and comparatively speaking, how we're doing, let's say, maybe to an incumbent solution or a comparative solution, right? Maybe in another channel. Is there something that we can learn about what's working well elsewhere that can inform, educate, and inspire what we're doing in the channel that we're trying to address, right? And the other thing that I would say, Chad, is maybe to tie back to something that Nick and Fergus mentioned earlier. We are, let's say, with some of the customers that we've been engaged with for many years, we're at the point, or we are seeing a certain level of maturity in the solutions that we've been working on across these various channels. And this is where that sort of higher, let's say, level champion, senior manager, senior executive comes in and says, okay, well, what's next, right? What can we do to get those additional points, or delight our customers, or make sure that we're able to solve those, the customer's question, the customer's issue at first contact, regardless of what channel they decide to do business in. And making sure that we have a view of that end-to-end customer journey and look at optimizing this across those channels. I think, one of the things that we as a team discuss internally is educating our customers around the fact that as you're taking a look at this holistically, you may have to give up gains in some channels, right, in order to accomplish benefits in others, and solve kind of like the bigger problem more holistically, right, looking at it more broadly.
Well, just with a few minutes left, and I could keep asking some questions around that, but we're going to move on. Nick, I want to ask you, in your technology architect component, when you were talking about these new capability platforms, I was wondering, does this add unique complexities or differences that we've never thought of as CX leaders with some of the new possibilities? So that was kind of a thought going through my mind, and I was very interested in what you were saying there. And then the other thing that came to mind, Nick, maybe the question to you is, what is the number one thing we're trying to solve? When we think of technology, either we're trying to solve or we feel we need to be solving as we continue through this journey.
Yeah. So on the first point, I think it's a great point. With power comes great responsibility. It sounds fantastic. We could enable huge parts of our organization to now be service creators, but so silos had a reason. Their control and innovation at that level may be the opposite of control, and so you still need the guiding principles and the frameworks to control that. CX isn't something you can just throw out and let everybody have a crack at it. It's important. Those stats at the beginning, you have to manage that. So it's a balancing act. You need to control the delivery of it, but what you don't want is the delivery of it being locked down in one silo. And the speed with which you respond is often dictated by those silos and their own sort of programs and initiatives. And I think to your point about, particularly in these response, big event type things, what happens? How can we help? These technologies scale. We can wind you up 20,000 agents really quickly if we know what that agent has to do. And the best contact center in the world can't do that. And that's why during pandemic, everybody looked to these solutions. And with the platforms and these new sort of more higher velocity service creation tools, you can do it quickly. And that's really the difference, I think, with the old IVR, which was very static and monolithic, and you could change every 1 year. Now you can roll out changes really quickly. And if you're in control from a business, you can do that within your own boundaries. You don't have to come to a vendor all the time to deliver that new experience that you need to deal with the sudden event that's happened. I think that's probably the biggest customer experience change. You can leverage AI. Applied AI is really about allowing us to get these tools in the hands of people who don't have to be machine learning experts to leverage that ability, which is scalability for CX. So that's how I think about that these days.
And gentlemen, this conversation will have to continue because unfortunately, the time goes really fast. There was an example, Nick, you talked about without some of the data, they were thinking of turning off the VA, the virtual assistant. I'd love to continue to share and talk about that because I think that's a real thing that does happen for a number of different reasons. What I do know, folks in the community of execs who know Nuance is there's a number of clients that in our community, or a number of organizations that use Nuance services and products. John and team, as we kind of continue this discussion around these pillars and topics, anything in the way of white papers or research studies or anything you can continue, I'll make sure we get that pushed out to the larger community. But I do want to say thank you, John, Nick, Fergus, and Marco. I wish we had more time. John, I'm going to leave it with you if there's any kind of last minute things you want to say, but I'm glad we've got this recorded because there was a lot of good examples and I appreciate the sharing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chad, and apologies for that little hiccup I had. Just really quickly, obviously providing this omni-channel experience offers a lot of benefits, right? Providing that good connected customer experience, but it's hard and it presents a lot of different challenges. And, when we were going through this exercise, we even identified that, it wasn't so long ago that our own company was focused within individual channels and delivering within those channels. And we've done some things to address that. It's a journey. We've got some experience from that and we're willing to help those. We're here to help those who may benefit from that. But as you said, otherwise, thank you to everyone for the time. Thanks for this opportunity. And that's it. We hope you have a good rest of your day.
Well, on behalf of execs in the know, everyone stay well, keep customer number one. Thank you, John and team there. We appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your evening, day, and upcoming weekend. Thank you. This will now conclude today's webinar.